Welcome to the Climate Hive show. What do you solve? Where we sit down with global game changers on climate. My name is Kevin Drolet, aka Kadro, and I'm here with Mike Higgins, aka Higo. And today, we're super excited to be talking to the Honnold Foundation, a climate nonprofit founded by world-renowned climber Alex Honnold, best known for his ropeless climbs of some of the world's biggest rock walls and also buildings. Alex started the foundation in 2012 after years of living simply out of his van, climbing around the world, and asking the practical question of where could his resources make the clearest and most tangible impact. Since then, the Honnold Foundation has grown into a global force for community-led solar energy. Their mission is to expand energy access, reduce environmental impact, and support marginalized communities as they lead their own transition to clean energy. And the impact is real. Since 2019, the Honnold Foundation has helped expand solar access for 650,000 people across 135 partner projects in 33 countries, territories, and tribal lands. And their 2025 impact report also notes that the foundation now represents nearly 8% of all community direct solar funding globally. So, leading this work is our guest, Emily Teitsworth, Executive Director of the Honnold Foundation, a passionate advocate for equity and environmental justice with 2 decades of experience growing nonprofit and philanthropic organizations across Central America, Sub Saharan Africa, South Asia, and the United States. So, Emily, thank you so much. We're so excited to talk to you. And Mr. Hickel, please kick us off today.
Emily, our first question is the name of our show. So we'd like to start with that direction. I'll just ask you straight out with the Honnold Foundation. What do you solve?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm gonna hope that you come up with a nickname for me as well by the end of this hour. So, the problem and issue that the Honnold Foundation works to solve is really at its core about how do we make the transition to renewable energy work for everyone. Now, there is a lot of big bet tech. There's a lot of utility scale investment in solar and other renewable energies. And still, 45% of the world is living in energy poverty. Nearly 700 million people have no access to electricity at all, clean or dirty. And so the question that we ask is, if we put solar in the hands of communities that need it most, what is possible? And what we've seen over and over again over the past decade is not only is it a climate and energy intervention, but it can lead to improved conservation outcomes, more community resilience, better economic opportunity as well. And so for us, solar is really the means to a much broader end. And our focus is on solving how do we make this technology work for people?
And it really seems like, 'cause that's an amazing mission, and you guys are off to the races with this. It's absolutely fascinating. And it's built around solar as the energy resource. I mean, when you think about it, I guess there really is no other energy resource given, where you're putting things, there is no infrastructure, right? Is is like what's you guys got solar going? Is it going to keep going with just solar? You think you'll evolve into other things?
You would be surprised how often I get asked why we don't invest in nuclear. So it's yeah, not a surprise to ask the question, but I think when you really think about off-grid communities in the Ecuadorian Amazon or
Yeah.
remote homesteads on the Navajo Nation in the US, solar is the most affordable and adaptable form of electricity. And so in some cases, we've invested in solar plus hydro. We have a couple partners that are starting with solar and then hope to build larger scale wind infrastructure as well. And so, it can be used in combination with other forms, but for the kind of work that we do at this point, solar is the best solution. And ultimately, I think we're technology agnostic. If something else comes up and it works better and is more affordable, then we're going to invest in that. We tend, however, though, there's a lot of work that is focused on innovating even within solar, and we're not always necessarily looking for the cutting edge tech, right? We want something that's been tried
Mhm.
and tested and is not going to break next year, right? Because although we partner with communities and organizations for a long time, we want to make sure that whatever we're helping them install is built to last. And so there is some amazing innovation happening around the size of solar panels, balcony solar and plugins and things that I think eventually will reach the kind of, scale in the communities that we work with. But for our needs, I think solar is still the most flexible, affordable, and secure form of renewable.
Emily, you guys have been at it since 2019. Obviously, Alex was starting in 2012, so this journey, but still a fairly short period of time to have accomplished a lot. Can you give us an idea of what that journey's been like as you've developed?
So the foundation started as a sponsored project of the Tides Foundation. And that just meant starting in 2012 and from 2012 to 2018, essentially it was a vehicle for Alex to invest in solar projects that he felt were particularly catalytic, but there was not necessarily a structured grant program or a theory of change, as we kind of think about it more traditionally in the nonprofit space. And so in 2018, right around the time the documentary Free Solo came out, spun out and became a 501c3 nonprofit. We had our first external executive director. And then in 2020, we launched our first formal open call for grant applications. So definitely a tough year to start to launch something. But I think it was one of those silver lining moments. And obviously, it was a very difficult time to do nonprofit work. And even for things like supply chain in the solar industry, it was hard to get panels and to get them delivered places.
Mhm.
But it sort of pressure tested the model from the beginning in a way that has turned out to be really beneficial for us. And one of the things that we've taken from that is the desire to move with urgency and then to be patient with our partners. And so when we think about climate and energy poverty, those issues are incredibly urgent for the communities we work with, right? They are facing the challenges of heat, drought, worsening storms, all of these things that come with climate change on a daily basis. And if they don't have access to clean power or to any power at all, they're really not built to be able to withstand the changing climate and to adapt and mitigate climate change in their local area. And so we really feel that one of the challenges in philanthropy, especially, is this phenomenon where the further you get from the problem, the less urgency you feel. And
Mm.
so, one of the things that I've really admired about Alex since I joined in 2021 is the fact that he never really wanted to build up an endowment. It was all about donating and raising funds from other partners and moving the money as quickly as possible to our partners. And so that's what we've continued to do. In some ways, we operate like a spend down foundation where we are raising money and giving it to partners as efficiently as possible. And then I think on the flip side, where philanthropy can at times get it wrong as well, is the sense that if you try it and it doesn't work right away, then it's not worth keeping at it. And so try to embrace failure as a learning experience and then also just understand that the kinds of communities we work with are facing challenges that are complicated and real change takes time. So from that first experience in 2020, we learned that almost all of the projects would end up being successful as long as we were flexible and we worked with them in partnership and gave them the time they need to succeed. And so um, that model has, been refined and expanded over the last 5 or 6 years. But ultimately, the focus really is on casting a wide net, finding innovative early stage or pilot projects that are using solar as a catalyst, and then
Mhm.
supporting them with grant funding, providing capacity building support, and then leveraging our platform and Alex's platform to amplify those solutions to a broader audience.
No, it's clear and really awesome. Because I was going to ask, power is kind of step one, and then there's all kinds of things that go along with power, like light bulb infrastructure, right? Like AC, you mentioned heat, right? These parts of the world, so air conditioning, and then I'm thinking of things like Wi-Fi, broadband, right? So power, solar is the beginning. Great, we have electricity now. Now we have to, is that all done through the partners in terms of really building out the entire ecosystem of what you can apply the energy to? In like for instance, I keep thinking of Starlink. What a tremendous partner they would be, right? And are they already a partner? Are you already working with them? And what about things like AC, which is not easy to transport? It's heavy, requires maintenance sometimes. How does that all work?
Yeah, I think you raised two important points. One is the sort of infrastructure that enables solar, right? So, rooftop solar requires a roof in good condition, right? Or a roof
Right.
that's not
Yep.
a thatched hut. And so that's why a lot of the work that we do ends up supporting like ground mount, or other sort of off-grid configurations because there is an infrastructure component that goes around the solar that is really important to think about and like how is that going to adapt to the way people build wherever we're supporting work. And then your point about Starlink is right on. A lot of what we have seen in terms of requests and uses of the solar is for connectivity. And
Hmm.
we're not a direct partner of Starlink. Generally, we're not the organization that is actually doing the installation ourselves. We're working with
Right.
local, for-profit or nonprofit solar installers and local companies. And then it's up for the community to decide how they want to use the solar. And so our funding is used for the solar infrastructure. It could be solar and battery, in some cases, solar and hydro, and those kind of integrations. And then we also fund the work around it. So whatever organization we're supporting will support some of their personnel costs. And then in the case of, solar at a school, for example, very often what they're asking for is support for things like Starlink to enable like more connectivity for students, to enable distance learning and all of these things that I think in places like where we all live, we take for granted. And so that has been one of
Right.
the most catalytic kind of combinations, that connectivity. Also been really interestingly used in a few places now to power radio and community networks of radio. And so in South America and later this year in Central America, we're going to be supporting partners that are solarizing indigenous community radio and then using that as a form of community organizing to help communities connect with each other directly, share news and information, and organize around issues that matter to them. And so, whether it's Starlink or, good old-fashioned AM radio, it is a really powerful combination when you think about power plus that connectivity.
Yeah.
It's interesting, like you know, people think about like, oh, get solar everywhere, save the climate, but this is like 45% of the world has energy poverty, which is just mind-boggling, like to think about, given like how ubiquitous like even cell phones or like, the internet is, but this disconnectivity. But one challenge that I would imagine is like, how do you pick from 1,800 people apply to get funds to help? And you've really, I mean, 33 countries. I was looking at the case studies that are on the your 2025 impact report, which we'll post because they're really amazing stories, and you can see life transformation. I mean, like I think there's nothing better than those stories. But how do you pick who to work with? What's some of the criteria?
You mentioned at the beginning the fact that there really is not a lot of global funding for community-led and community-owned solar, and we're giving between $5 and $10 million in grassroots grants a year. And that represents, between 8 and 10% of all global funding in this space. So it is generally an underfunded space, especially in the last couple of years. Opportunities for both US organizations and global organizations have shrunk, especially around renewable energy. And so
Hmm.
as our network has grown, the broader ecosystem of this kind of support has shrunk. And so every year we're getting more and more interest. And we received over 1,200 applications in January this year. And so it's an amazing opportunity to be able to support the best of the best. And also there's this huge pipeline where I'm hopeful that other philanthropists and other funders will start to step in more. Um, but our process is really in some ways drawn from our founder Alex's approach to climbing and what it means to climb with a partner. And that is you do a lot of upfront research, you get to know somebody really well, and then you trust them with your life in climbing. And we've tried to take a similar approach where we do a lot of upfront due diligence. And then when we decide to fund a partner, we're really trusting them to do what's best and allowing them the flexibility to change their budget and adjust the timeline and just respond to conditions on the ground as they change. And what that looks like in practice is so far, every year we have done an open call for proposals, and that really is a letter of interest. It's a very short pitch that they can send us, and we look at all of them. We narrow that down to a finalist pool of this year it was about 100. So already like a very narrowed funnel. And then we invite those partners back to flesh out their idea, to give us specs around the solar and the actual like technical side of the work. And then we go through a process of due diligence. We have a call with every organization. We do things like media and terrorist screenings and a lot of that kind of like both required and I think helpful screenings to make sure that the organization is doing the work that it says it is. It really is embedded in the community that it's going to be working in, and there's no other red flags. And once we go through that process, we provide the funding up front and we really trust the partner. And we tell our partners, once you're a partner, you're always a partner. So even after the partnership ends in terms of the financial component, our organizational partners can come back and get capacity support. They can ask for funding to attend a conference. We might make a short film with them. And so we're really trying to keep the network engaged and vital, even if we only funded a 6-month or an 18-month project.
Okay, I'm glad we went through that because I was thinking initially when we were talking about those proposals, the people delivering them were the communities themselves, but it's the partners who have a vision or a plan for a community in an area, and they're the ones that are coming to you guys saying, help us because this is what we're going to go do.
Yeah, we're always funding either a community organization, a nonprofit, or in some cases, a tribal government. But they have to be closely connected to the community. So either they are a community organization already and they're just like representing the broader community, or they're an organization that has worked for years with this group, and they have to really clearly articulate what the connection is so that it's not, so much of this kind of infrastructure work ends up being like a drag and drop where somebody comes in and says, okay, well, we're going to put a well here, we're going to put a school here, we're going to put a solar installation here. And then they don't think about the longevity and the sustainability of the infrastructure, who's going to manage it, who's going to fix something if something goes wrong, and how it's really going to be leveraged for the good of the community. And so that's why we've always supported through local organizations. And interestingly, over the last few years, we've had more and more nonprofit partners come to us and ask for um, support upgrading or fixing a solar installation that another organization installed and then left. And so while it's unfortunate that it happened, it does feel, I think, particularly gratifying to be able to go in and help make sure that that doesn't happen again and that
Yeah.
we're there in case they need us, and we can help them make it work for the community.
Yeah, I had that question of like stranded assets because I know that um, that's, being a nonprofit, right? That the question of like the sustainability of a project, like you can go bring solar, but these things have to be maintained. You're building the microgrids, all that stuff requires an expertise in electricity, which communities might not have that expertise. Sounds like being a partner for life is partially like we're going to be there to help maintain. But what has been some of the experience of like stranded assets? How do you make sure that a project that a company's putting online doesn't just get sort of wasted almost?
Yeah, I mean, I hope we're still here in 25 years when like
Mm.
some of these solar panels that we originally installed start to need to be replaced. And I think then we'll really like hopefully be able to walk the walk. And at this point, everything is pretty new. And so we haven't had much direct experience of that yet. I will say what we have seen more of, especially in the last year and a half, is in the US with our local partners here. There was so much investment under the Biden administration that got frozen or clawed back or otherwise taken away over the last year and a half.
Mhm.
And so in West Virginia, for example, we supported, starting in 2020, this incredible organization called Coalfield Development. And we helped them solarize their first community center and train a cohort of out of work coal miners in solar and solar installation. And they ended up being part of a consortium of organizations that were awarded something like $900 million for a statewide uh,
Wow.
initiative. Incredible way to scale this up and really to convert not just the infrastructure, but also the workforce from coal to solar. Um, and so the one of those amazing cases where the organization essentially had graduated. There was no way that they needed our support anymore. So we were there to like cheer them on, but we were no longer directly investing. And then
Mm.
unfortunately, almost all of that got clawed back last year with the change of administration. And so they came back to us and said, "Hey, like we still have some work that we really want to keep going. We want to keep the core of the solar and the workforce development happening. And we also want to tell our story." And so we are reinvesting in the core of their work with another grant and working on a short film that we're going to hopefully premiere at New York Climate Week this fall, and share with broader audiences to mobilize more support around the work. Because I think it is, it's a really salt of the earth, very American community in rural West Virginia. It is not partisan in any way. And I think the more we can tell these stories that are really just about what the tangible benefits of solar are for communities and for real people, the more I think we can shift the narrative around the renewables transition and just kind of remember that this is the most affordable, secure, and responsive form of energy, and it's helping make American communities safer. And so that's hopefully the story we're going to tell. But that's just one example of how we're thinking about sticking by our partners. And so what we see more so far than abandoned infrastructure is the inconsistencies that come with large scale funding. And so we're trying to help our partners, ride that wave, smooth things out, and then help them be ready when political winds shift again. And hopefully they're able to scale in the way they originally envisioned.
That's a great story about West Virginia. I'm very familiar with that state and a lot of hardship, lost a lot of industry, chemical manufacturing, coal, other things like that. So it's great to hear that vision was there to try to fill that void a little bit. It's really awesome. It makes me wonder what percentage of the programs that you're investing in begin with no power whatsoever, like we don't have electricity versus let's retrofit the power source. Is it one or the other most of the time?
I think the majority right now are off grid, but it's not entirely off grid. So it is an interesting mix, and I think it changes every year depending on the pool of projects that were pitched. So
Okay.
there are quite a few that are fully off grid, and this is their first access, and a lot of that is we support quite a bit in like the Amazon basin and
Yeah.
island nations like Indonesia and the Philippines, and these are places that have just had to exist without power for centuries.
Mhm.
There is quite a bit though where the community is interested in shifting their source of energy. So there's a lot of reliance on diesel generators, coal, in some places kerosene and diesel. These really almost like retro forms of getting energy. But they
Yeah.
want to transition to something cleaner. Or in the case of somewhere like Puerto Rico, it is like a mostly coal-powered grid and very dirty forms of energy mostly. But it's also very unreliable. And so they're not necessarily always just looking for the like that first light bulb, but more the reliability. And especially in places that are more and more impacted by storms, the reliability and the ability to keep the lights on when a storm hits. And that's something that most grids don't offer. And so it is a mix. But it has been interesting to see. I think we're getting more and more requests from communities that have some form of connectivity to a grid, or could, but it's just not reliable. And I think it comes back to that statistic on energy poverty, right? Like technically they do have access to electricity, but you know, it's coal or diesel generators, and they can't really access it reliably or at the scale that they need to do things like refrigerate vaccines and turn on Starlink and all of these things that in some ways are pretty basic, but can be really
Mhm.
transformational.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
interesting. We talked to a previous podcast last year, a woman who's in Nigeria who was swapping out diesel generators for solar. And so without going into the whole story, one of the things that we learned was the safety issue for women in particular, but for people is like if you have a generator going and they're really loud, and so it creates this, you know, this issue where people can't be heard over the generator, and it also is like hey, we have a generator, and so it's like a financial thing too, right? You've got a generator means you have some, you know, money or whatever the case. um, so it's interesting solar, the many benefits that solar brings when you bring it in. I was curious if, because you've been in so many diverse, like, you talked about coal field development in West Virginia, but then you're in Puerto Rico and you're in the Amazon, so many diverse places and communities. Is there a way that
Mm.
these communities learn from each other? Do you guys do that at all? Like where they share best practices, to make sure that they're getting the most efficiency out of these contributions?
This is very timely because it's actually something that we're talking about internally right now at the Honnold Foundation. Um, we now have a network of over 100 partners in 30 countries, and there's amazing opportunities for locally connected organizations. For example, we have something like 8 partners now in Guatemala to connect and to learn from each other and to share best practices. But we've also started to think about how we could build connections with organizations that might not on the surface have that much in common. It's like an indigenous-led organization in New Zealand and Native American communities in the upper Midwest in the US. And so we are hoping to bring together a group of partners in person for the first time next year. And we're at the point right now where our current strategic plan is expiring and we're starting to think like what really is the core, what's working well, and what might we need to shift. And the thing that we've heard over and over again from our partners is that they want that in-person time. They want to connect and they want to learn from each other. And in my experience, you can sometimes kind of over-program that. And certainly we would, have a structured space for them, but sometimes it really is just about putting them in the same room together and letting them talk.
Mhm.
And so we're looking for ways to do that. I think visa challenges make it difficult to do that in the US. And so we're starting to think about like whether we do that regionally, globally, or how we organize it practically. But absolutely, that is sort of the next phase because um, if we're able to support a partner to adapt something one of our existing grantees has already tried somewhere, to me, that would be an amazing success. And it's not something that we've done yet.
Well,
Yeah, I'll tell you.
that's why I put it in the memo for you guys to discuss.
Perfect.
I'm like, I want to attend that meeting.
I do
You
too.
know, one of your revenue generating things might be charge people like us money to come and just be a fly on the wall. Man, I would love to, listen to ideas, listen to the exchange, listen to what's been done, listen to what worked, listen to what didn't, you know, see the roadmap for what's coming. That would be amazing, you
Yeah,
know?
I mean, in my role as executive director, I don't get as much time as I'd like with our partners. And so I'll be right there with you, just kind of lurking in the back because it's one of the things that I feel most grateful about in my work is that my whole job, my day to day is supporting solutions and incredible visionary leaders doing great things. And so people do often ask, like, oh, do you feel, you know, optimistic or pessimistic about climate? It's such a daunting problem. And that is true. And I think when you spend time around these kind of people and organizations, it's hard not to be optimistic just because they're doing such amazing things with, in many cases, really limited resources.
Yeah. Well, and you guys, when you really, bang around your site, you guys don't really talk about climate. You're talking about energy access. And that felt to me like a deliberate way of sort of staying out of a political conversation, which it shouldn't be, but it can be, and just focusing on, the brass tacks. This is energy access. So let's call it what it is, and it happens to have all these ancillary benefits. I have solar on my house for the climate reason, right? I was tired of buying energy from a coal-fired plant. But it's an unfortunate position to be able to put solar on my house. Not everybody is, you know, it's not free, so. But I picked that up on your site and thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it's in some spaces we do talk about climate, and I think it is a tricky line to walk, especially in the US,
Hmm.
because there's a lot of forces saying like, don't talk about climate, don't talk about race, don't talk about
Right.
gender. Um, and and also, I think a lot of the renewable energy discourse is not as grounded in real people's everyday needs as it could be. And so I think there's like a both and there where I'm definitely not an advocate of scrubbing your site for all of those keywords because
Right.
I think it is important that we say like this is a climate issue.
Yeah.
Like we are talking
Right.
about climate
Say it
change,
like it is.
real. Um, and at the same time, like in West Virginia, for example, there's some interest in like knowledge of climate change, but ultimately it's about like, can I feed my family? Can I turn on
Right.
the lights? What does resilience for this community that my family has been in for 5 generations look like? And I think that's pretty shared across the communities that we work in, regardless of where they are. It's just people want to thrive in the places that they call home.
Hmm.
And this is a tool to do that. And so I think we're at this point where, I mean, there was a survey earlier this year that a vast majority of Trump's voters are pro solar and pro renewables when they think about it in the context of their daily lives. And so I think that the support is there. It's just sort of how we talk about it, and um, this idea that solar and renewables are a more secure form of energy is one of the ways that we've started talking about it more because it is not dependent on the whims of some, despot around the world that like you have no connection to. You could put it in your backyard and you could rely on that in a way that you can't necessarily ever rely on fossil fuels. And so, um, yeah, not deliberate, at least in terms of our site and our approach to not talk about climate. But I do think
Hmm.
there's this opportunity to say, like, yes, it is climate change, and also, like, it's a tool to make everyday people's lives better.
Yeah, we talk a lot about behavior change just ends up coming up on this show a lot because we're talking with people that are innovating and bringing new ideas and advancing them forward that are beneficial. And it's impacting, the climate, but they're impacting lives fundamentally. I mean, I think that's the thing about the Honnold Foundation is like at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're impacting lives. You're giving people, better lives. You're allowing people to have, fundamental things, especially like that we might take for granted here, in the US or in the global north, whatever, just having energy, just being able to turn things on. Um, in the work that you do and I really love the Coalfield story. Are there other stories that stand out to you that really like exemplify the work that you're doing or you feel really proud of?
Yeah, I mean, there are amazing stories, I think, in every community, and we're in the process now of trying to dig into those more. And you mentioned the case studies that are in our impact report, and we're trying to tell more of those stories to a broader audience because um, I think it's an amazing what solar can unlock. And when we think about measuring what happens and what matters, it's really easy to say, like, did you install solar panels? How many? Is there battery storage? How much? And those like short-term outcomes or outputs are really easy to measure and easy to understand. But then what happens in a community over, 3, 5, 10 years, that
Yeah.
is really hard to predict. And in some ways, I think the most important thing to think about and document is what happens generally generationally, basically, what happens for a community that has access to this. And um, I just reconnected with an organization that we first supported in 2020, actually, before I even joined the Honnold Foundation, called Anambas, and it's in Indonesia. And their solar innovation was using solar to power e-waste recycling facilities across small islands in Indonesia. And as you probably know, things like waste disposal are a huge problem for island communities. And so the idea was that they would solarize these recycling facilities and then hire local people to run them. And um, the project itself was a success, but we kind of lost touch with them. It seemed like everything was fine, but we hadn't had a chance to reconnect. And I just heard from one of the founders that our original funding, which was their pilot and sort of proof of concept, has continued to run. They've now expanded to over 70 sites across the country, and they have transferred ownership to local women's groups in all of these sites. And so for me, think that was an amazing opportunity to think like, oh wow, like all of these things are happening, even if we're not necessarily able to track every single project. And the other thing that they mentioned was that we were their first international funder. And so having access to that global sort of seal of approval and the ability to go to other funders and say, well, this has already been, piloted with the Honnold Foundation, even though we're not maybe the same name recognition as Gates or Packard, to have that kind of support already in place made their fundraising so much easier. And that is something that we don't necessarily talk about as much, but if we can have the courage to take a little bit of a risk and, be the first funder or try something new with a partner, it really can pay dividends down the line because very few funders, even in philanthropy, want to be the first. And so if we can be the first funder, it's amazing to see what that can potentially unlock down the line. Um, and with 100 partners, there's lots of those stories, but that one recently, I think, really struck me because it was like working in exactly the way that we hoped it had. And we talk about our work and our funding being like the catalytic early stage funding, but in some cases it hasn't even been that enough time for us to see that play out. And so it's really gratifying to see, okay, like this project we supported in 2020, that's how it's turned out. And to know that there's local women's groups that are supporting this scaled up network of e-waste recycling. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, it's broadening my perspective of what you guys are doing so much. Listening to that story, that's the ripple effect. That's phenomenal. These things that have happened, that have occurred, that weren't necessarily the focus of the investment, but have become as a result of the investment. Same thing with West Virginia. When you started talking initially, I was really thinking one way, and now I'm thinking, what you guys have really done is you've installed dignity in communities that really lack hope, right? Because with no industry, no work, West Virginia has a real drug problem. It has a drug problem because there's no industry and there's no work. And you're bringing that and changing that. That's a story of transition. That's a story of opportunity. It's a story of hope. It's a story of dignity. And I wasn't on that page at all when we started talking. And now I'm seeing it in a whole new light. I'm like, wow, and this story of these islands and the result, right? And even I can totally see how it would have been emboldening for them to be able to say, this organization, which is meaningful, believes in what we're doing. And look what we've been able to do in such a short period of time. We're people that you can trust to put more into. That's an effect that will last long beyond the foundation, right? Which I'm sure is your goal with every project you do is have it survive us, to
Yeah.
make real change.
I think I really appreciate that. And it's something I think a lot about, especially in the, US projects that we support. A lot of the work that we support is on Native nations, and Native American communities. And there is centuries of history of the government saying they're going to do something and then not doing it, or worse.
Mhm.
And so
Right,
West Virginia is sort of the same. There's been these cycles of boom and bust, investment, disinvestment, and it creates hopelessness, it creates distrust. And so even though we're small relative to the federal government, can we shift the narrative and be a partner
right.
that you could rely on? And yeah, what does that potentially change in terms of how the community sees itself?
I think too, like from, we talk to a lot of businesses, and of course you're a nonprofit, right? And so then there is this view of, the work that nonprofits do, and is it just kind of raising money, giving money, raising money, giving money? But the sustainability, the fact that you can like look and say, oh, we gave an engine that actually continued to run. We gave empowered people that continued to run and to go is it's impactful, and it's obviously really good for getting more people to say, hey, we want to support this foundation. And I just, this is I just wanted to ask before we left the show because Alex is super awesome. So and he's I would just love to know, well, what he's like to work with, and because he's such an inspiring guy. Can you give us just a little sense of that, or how you met him? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I met him on Zoom at the very end of my interview process for this job, and so I did not know him. I knew who he was, but I think when I applied for the job, there was not even a connection made explicitly that this was Alex Honnold's organization. And so I was not, seeking to work for a public figure or a professional athlete. And to be honest, I was a little skeptical. It's not really where I saw my career going. And so I kind of came in and like, let's see how how this plays out. Is this sort of a celebrity vanity project? And, is it going to be like a flash in the pan? And I've just been amazingly impressed the time that we've worked together. I'm, coming up on 5 years. And it's felt like it's gone really quickly, but he's somebody who is very values focused and very focused in general. I think the same level of intensity that he brings to climbing, he brings to the work with the Honnold Foundation. And so, he gives a third of his income to support our core operating costs every year. And as his profile and success outside of our work has grown, he's been able to scale that up. And so it means that people who invest in the Honnold Foundation are able to know that their funding is going directly to our partners and to the work itself. And so that is really powerful. And I really appreciate that, he's never had a traditional career. And so he doesn't have any idea of like, well, this is the status quo and this is how we should do it. And so things like coming up with the idea of having a 4-day work week and how that would support employee morale and also make us more effective ultimately. He was willing to try that and to think outside of the box in a way that I haven't really experienced in other places that I've worked. So yeah, I
Does
tell
he
him
make
he's
does
a
he
great
make all of
boss.
you guys does he make all of you guys climb with no ropes then? Is that part of
Yeah, exactly.
it?
We do climb together occasionally. I mean, I'm very bad at climbing, so I can barely call it climbing, but we do climb. We all use ropes. We have had a couple funny moments where some of us have been like struggling up what feels like a cliff with ropes, and he will, in his tennis shoes, just walk up. No rope, no nothing, no equipment, and just like give pointers from, halfway up the cliff. So he may actually be part mountain goat, not sure.
I think he is for
I
sure.
I saw a video your team did with him when you guys you were reading like the comments from people that were like complaining or criticizing or something like that. And I thought it was awesome because it wasn't ignoring that. It was just addressing it in a fun way. And I thought, wow, that is so cool. I think that comes into that unconventional thing that you mentioned, right? Because I know if I had one question to ask Alex, if I was hanging out with him, I'd ask, what do you do when you get halfway up El Capitan and you have to go to the bathroom? I mean, come on. Doesn't everybody want to know that? Like, what do you do? Like, you're
Yeah.
hanging on by your fingertips and you're like, you know, duty calls. I don't know. That's
He yells,
I
cut,
think,
cut film, turn the
yeah,
camera off from
I
the,
think that's a bigger issue that needs to be discussed, quite honestly.
the
Right.
next
Well,
But
those gaps in free solo, that who knows what was happening when they were shifting camera angles, right?
Yeah. Uh, Higo, did you come up with a nickname for Emily yet?
no, not that's worthy.
Yeah.
I imagine you've heard ET, but I'm like, that's not really worthy. Because it's her initials. You know where I'm going with that.
I'm
But
thinking M Worthness. M
Yeah.
Worthness.
Yeah. E worthy? I don't
E
know. I kind of
Worthy.
like that. I'll take
Okay. All right.
but I'll let you keep workshopping
Our
it.
our guest E Worthy. I like it. Is there anything, well, t tell the listeners also just how can we support the Honnold Foundation as we, are coming to the end of our show here, but how can we support you? And is there anything that we didn't ask you that you think, listeners should know?
This has been a great conversation. And if you are interested in learning more, you can check out honnoldfoundation.org. Our latest impact report is there, and we have profiles of all of our partners. So we love when people decide to join us and support this work directly. And we're also all about just doing the work that motivates you and taking that first step in your climate giving. So whether it's a Honnold Foundation or another amazing organization, we just encourage people to get involved in a way that's meaningful to them.
awesome. That's a great conclusion right there, bud.
Yeah.
Thank you both so much.
Good.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the show. It was really, really fun. And I have a lot more questions, but I was thinking, Mike, we were like, all right, we're preparing for the show. We're like, all right, we're going to really dig into the impact report for 2025. And then we're going to talk about like okay, so what does 2026 look like and 2027? So we'll have to have another couple of shows. Probably.
Absolutely. This was so fun. Do I get to see a pug before we go? Do you have a pug handy?
I've got a pug handy. Have you guys heard him? Because they've been
No.
snoring.
You must
They've
have
been
noise
snoring like,
canceling or something. I haven't heard anything.
oh, I
Where's
picked him up and I
Eddie?
dropped my headphone. Hold on. Hold on, Eddie. This is the big time snorer right here. This is Eddie,
yeah.
or who I call Eduardo. He's
Oh,
Adorable.
14.
Adorable.
He's one of our foster fails. Like Kevin said, we are Colorado Pug Rescue and Hugs and Pugs. We're in 2 rescues.
Yeah.
And we've managed to adopt 7 dogs, but not all of them are still with us. We get the old guys, because they're very hard to adopt. We get dogs that are handicapped and dogs that are old, and we take them. And so Eddie is hilarious. He's very loud.
Oh, man.
Big. He's giant. You can't really tell from this, but he's a big pug. And very funny dude, but he loves to come in my office and snore,
Yeah. It looks like he would be good at it. Absolutely.
Yep.
So sweet. Thank you.